Well, now I want to introduce James Traverna, who is, in my opinion, one of the great rub-on decal masters of our time. And I'm learning so much from you, Jim. I really do appreciate what you're doing. So welcome.
Okay, so somehow I've jumped to slide number 2, but the first slide, being a salesman, of course, was the title slide, which was we're going to talk about dry transfers, and we're going to letter. I don't know if you guys remember that brass tender that I had super detailed. It was a 50-year-old tender, and I brought it up to current detail standards. And then the last picture of it was it in primer. So I'm using that as our basis to do this presentation, and we'll see how that comes out. So to do dry transfers, you don't need a lot of tools, but the key thing with dry transfers is you have to be precise when you lay the transfer down, because you don't get a second chance. You can't shift it around like a decal. If it's down and if it's in the wrong place, you use some masking tape or Scotch tape and lift it up and throw it away. So you really want to be right. So I use the Tamiya tape that you see on the left to make hinges with the for the backer strip that the lettering is on. I have a nice set of shears that I use for both my decals and my rub-ons. And then a really trusty tool for me is a see-through 6-inch ruler, because I use that, and you'll see it'll play a lot in our progress through the process. And then I have a couple of sizes of tweezers so that I can lift the backer and so forth and take a look. The blue stylus that I use is something the UPS guy somehow forgot or dropped it on my porch. And so I use that for close-in rubbing. And then the whiter, fatter one was a Phoenix Express product that has a much blunter tip, and then it has a big flat tip in the back for doing broad rub-ons onto a flat surface. But I make a lot of use of my UPS stylus. And so here we are. This is the tender that we super detailed and so forth. I've painted over the primer with the scale coat paint, which gives us a very lovely sheen. You don't have to use any kind of gloss or anything on the paint job. And then this is a 30-year-old tender that's from Sunset that I also super detailed, but this one has been lettered. It looked like this before I put the lettering on, and then dull coated the whole thing. But I'm using this as my master because I had taken drawings of the railroad and so forth to figure out where the lettering was on this particular class of tender on the Pensy. And for lettering, Clover House has a very complete HO and O scale line of lettering and things of that nature. And I'm modeling in the buff period. Unfortunately, you can't get O scale buff anymore because they haven't been able to print it, and they can't find a printer. But I have a good supply of it, so that's what we're using here. And by measuring the side of the tender in the lettering that's post 38 or so, they had a broader lettering, and so we're going to use the 20-foot long lettering set. This one here is what we need for that tender. And so we take the lettering strip out, or the paper out of the package, and it comes with the 4 sets, but they come on, you get about 4 pieces like this. So this one across the top is the lettering size we're going to use, and I've laid it on top of the finished tender to compare it to make sure that we're on the right track. And sure enough, that's the lettering I used before. But you'll notice the lettering doesn't carry on for the whole word. The A is down here. So we're going to talk in a little bit later about what I did to solve that problem. So now here's my trusty see-through ruler. And you can see I've laid the ruler right on the bottom edge of the tender to determine the height of the lettering. And actually, you can't pick it out yet, but there's a row of rivets that are right at the very tops of these letters. The lettering was right at that rivet line. And so that happens to match with the second line from the top. You can see the letters are all sitting right on that line. So that's our objective for the new tender. We want to make sure it goes in the same spots. And I've also measured on either end to make sure it's in the right location on the tender. So here's our undull coated or shiny tender, the new one. And you can see I've laid it on with the Tamiya tape, and it's down, but I didn't get it just right. You can see that the bottom of the letters, while pretty even, are below the line, which is our objective to try to put it on. So we have to take it up and do it again. And so now we're at the other end of the lettering, and I've lifted it and measured. It took me about 5 minutes to 10 minutes to get this exactly right. But now you see the letters are right on the line on this end, so I'm very happy there. And I've got it on the line on the other end. So the lettering now is both on the right height on the side of the tender, and it's horizontal. It's dead true because of the ruler giving us that kind of advantage. So here I am with my quotes borrowed UPS stylus, and I'm now rubbing down. You can see each letter has a dark surround around it. That's where I've rubbed it in onto the paint, and the adhesive in the back of the ink or the paint is now sort of grabbing onto that paint. And I don't mind, my paint is not exactly glass smooth, and this gives me a better tooth to actually grab onto with the lettering. And once I dull coat it, it'll still look just perfect. So now's the big reveal. We're going along now. So slowly I use the tweezers to lift up very carefully the first letter. And I'm looking to see if the eye is complete. Everything's okay there. And we're in good shape on that one. And I start to pull it back now, and the end's pretty complete. So I'm feeling good, but I get to the S, and you can see the S's corner is clipped. So you can't tell right off, but that piece of gold is still on the on this backer. So I lay the backer back down on the lettering, and that's why I keep the tape on the left side so everything stays in registration. And then I re-rub it, and that'll fill in the S. And you can see here that the letters are all right along that rivet strip, which is where we wanted them. So now the S is perfect after we've re-rubbed it. N looks good. So things are looking better. We're more than halfway along, so I'm feeling a little more confident. I got a little overconfident. So the E did not transfer very well. And I also lost the serif of the N at the top. So again, I lay it back down again, and then I have to carefully re-rub it. And you have to be careful laying that down to make sure you get it right back into the original registration. And so here I have it down, and you can see the letters that had transferred, and I'm rubbing. I have rubbed hard in this area so you can see the black coming through, because it really worked to get the letters transferred. And I went over the P again a little bit to also ensure that was done. And so there you can see the lettering is complete. The N has its serif and the E is total. And so we've got almost all of the lettering. We got the Pennsylvania E. We haven't got the Pennsylvania. So we got to get that A in there. And so now we have to take the next step. So we go back and take that lettering package that we had. We had cut off the top row, which had the Pennsylvania E, but without the A. And so we lay the other lettering right on top of what we've transferred. And that gives us the registration in terms of the height and horizontal. We then set the A of that other Pennsylvania right on the N over here, and we line up the serifs of the A with the top of the N. And that sets the registration by the way they printed it, so that the I is from the underneath lettering that we transferred, and the A is in exactly the right place. It's got the right spacing and everything, and it's at the right height, and everything's nicely blended. So we rub that down carefully. We don't want to press on this area too much or the other lettering. We don't want anything of that to transfer. And there it is. Now the A is in place. And so you've got the whole name of the Pennsylvania. I wish I modeled Erie. My life would have been a hell of a lot easier. But unfortunately, it's the Pennsylvania. And so there we have one side done. So I take a moment for self-congratulations, looking at the handiwork. And now I have to flip the tender over and do the other side. The problem is we want to make sure when we go to do the other side that you don't shift the tender on that foam base that I was using, because you can rub off the letters that you've just put down, because there's nothing protecting them yet. We haven't dull coated over them, which is what we use to really penetrate the letters and keep them permanently on the side of the car. So here we have the ruler right at the base of the body, and you can see the letters are right along that line. So everything is registered. We've already checked left and right, so we know that we like the location. Everything's in place, so we go about it exactly the same way. All steps again. And here we are pulling it up, and it's those damn ends with their narrow runs. And so we've lost, we got a piece of end missing, but it's over here on the backer. So we roll the backer again over it, and we re-rub it. And that's the other side of the tender. So now we've got both sides of the tender, and there's the prototype, and there's the new model. You can see that the interior of the tender cold space and the top of the back of the tender is painted an oxide red, which was Pensy practice. So we've done a 2-color paint job. So it's looking pretty nice. And the left tender shows you a little bit with weathering how the deck gets dulled down quite a bit. So you spend most of your time measuring and locating. So you have to do it right, as I mentioned. So you got to make sure you've got it right. It's level, horizontal, looks good before you start rubbing. The one thing I will say, it's really good for flat surfaces, box cars, reefers, those kinds of things, tenders, but it's not terrific in all applications. If you've got curved surfaces, and really when they're small curved surfaces like the ribs on the end and stuff like that, they're very difficult. So what I do is you can transfer the lettering onto clear decal paper, and then apply then the lettering with the decal as a decal to those end surfaces. And so you don't lose the lettering by trying to rub on around a small curve. And that's dry transfer work. Slow, careful, but really nice, and no decal film to worry about. It really looks good, at least in my impression. Any questions?
Jim,
Yeah.
how you said those 2 tenders were old. How old are they?
Well, the one that's all shiny and just painted is 50 years old, and the other one is about 30 years old. But who's counting at our age?
Thanks.
James, do you have any methods for rejuvenating old dry transfers?
Well, I have some of those. I have a lot of CDS, and
Yes.
to be honest, what I've been doing since I bought them is I keep them in sealed plastic bags in a dark cabinet in my shop. And so that Clover House lettering, that stuff is probably 20 years old, because that's when I bought it, because I have a large number of engines. But to try to rejuvenate it, the problem is the lettering contains a sort of a solvent, and it's a special solvent, so that when you take it out of the package, you got the backer paper on behind the carrier, and so once you start exposing that to air, that solvent is dissipating. And so once they get really old, the only thing you can do is try to heat them to try to make the letters a little bit more pliable and a little bit tackier. But it can be a real challenge. And if you notice that your carrier paper has discolored, like CDS, you'll look at it and it'll look like old wax paper, sort of a yellowish cast. Then your rub-ons are in the end of their life, and you might want to have 2 or 3 sets to do one car, because you may not get the transfer of all of the lettering from either set.
Thank you.
James, I may have made a mistake. I also have you down for another segment next week, or is this the last segment you're doing on decaling?
Well, no, you had asked for next week. You have sort of sucked me in, and by suggesting that you wanted to do removing decals, because I've done a project where I've stripped off Champ decals, which were wrong, off of some key diesels, and then repainted them and then rub on with correct lettering. So if you want, I can try to do some work this week to get something together for that. If not,
absolutely. I want to suck you in as long as I possibly can, because you're teaching me an awful lot, because I've never used rub-ons before. So I really appreciate this.
I think it's actually a conspiracy between you and Greg.
Well, thanks so much, James. We'll see you next week.
Okay, my pleasure.